Okay, we're here with George Hotz, who is famous for hacking the iPhone and the PlayStation. And for us philosophy geeks, he is also pretty infamous for his South by Southwest talk, jailbreaking the simulation. And I think that's probably going to comprise a good portion of our conversation with him this afternoon. George, welcome.
Hi, good to be here.
And Corey is with us as well.
Hello.
Corey, I don't know if you wanted to start it off. You've written at least one book on the subject. I think it's unpublished as of yet, but on the simulation hypothesis.
That's correct. Well, George, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into how you came about thinking about the simulation hypothesis?
Sure. So my name is George. I'm interested in systems and understanding not what people say they are, but what they really are.
Like their revealed preferences, not their stated preferences.
Yeah.
And where are you from originally?
I grew up in New Jersey. I guess I was born in New York. I lived in Australia for a few years, and then grew up in, suburban New Jersey.
Now, were you in the Bay Area?
No, not anymore.
Okay.
I moved down to San Diego.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Why'd you leave the Bay Area?
For all the reasons everyone did.
Everyone else. When did you move to San Diego?
About 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome. It's a beautiful city.
Yeah, it's nice to be here.
So how did you get into the simulation hypothesis? Where did you first hear about it?
Probably a long time ago. It's one of those like rationality tropes that always just goes around. For me, I would read, and you read like this theory about like the Big Bang, and it doesn't make any sense. Because where did the Big Bang come from? Oh, universe and random fluctuate. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. Yeah. Don't ask too many questions about what was before the Big Bang, or if there was a before, or if there's anything outside of this universe. Yeah. The simulation hypothesis, I guess, has been around for a while. You can even, if you, I guess, expand the definition of it, a couple thousand years. But I guess it became maybe more prominent in nerd circles when Bostrom published his paper about 20 years ago, and he put forward a Fermi estimate for the likelihood that we are actually living in a simulation. Have you read that paper?
Probably a long time ago, yes. I did associate Bostrom's name with it right away, but I'm like, is that right, or I don't know.
Right. Did you ever play around with his or the Fermi estimate that he put forward, which I call the Bostrom equation, and just like plug in different parameters and see like how likely it actually is?
So I find with a lot of these things, it's really hard to say. Right, I'm forgetting exactly what this equation was, but like I know there's like different tricks. Like if you are, if 1,000 of you are simulated and put in a green room, and the one real you is put in a red room, right? And you find yourself in a green room, what are the odds that the green room that you're actually the simulation? Right, or 50-50 chance of ending up in a green room or a red room. And like these things kind of mess with probability, kind of like the Monty Hall problem, and it depends so much on what your priors are.
That's true, yeah. But it ultimately all depends, I guess, upon the principle of indifference, which I guess comes intuitively, I found, to some people, and other people not so much. Like when you try to explain this to them, they're like, no, but I don't see a computer, therefore I'm not in a simulation. So when did you like start taking it seriously, like actually start like thinking about this in depth, instead of just like, oh, that's a weird curiosity, and then moving on?
So I'm probably pretty out of my depth here. I don't take it that seriously. And my South by Southwest talk was not exactly a serious attempt to say we live in a simulation or we don't live in a simulation. I think this question may even be unknowable, but I'm not sure if it matters. My goal with the South by Southwest talk was to talk about how maybe somewhat ridiculously inward focused our culture is today. And if that doesn't change, we're dead. To me, this is a much more immediate problem than jailbreaking the simulation.
All right, you piqued my interest. Tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean?
Well, so the greatest question in my life is maybe how do you avoid wireheading? Right? Like,
we'll have to tell the listeners what wireheading is. I can give a quick description if you want. If that
yeah,
helps.
sure. And I'll...
So basically, it's let's just say that our whole society is around, I don't know, getting pleasure and whatnot. Well, as technology advances, maybe they'll just Elon Musk Neuralink will just plug receptor electrodes right up to our dopamine receptors, and we'll just click on Google ads and then get shots of dopamine, and so it'll just be like brains in a vat.
Yeah. Wireheading could be as simple as that. Wireheading is any sort of changing of your reward function, right? So we have this carefully evolved human reward function, and we're going to acquire the ability very soon. Well, we have already the ability to just straight up manipulate the reward function and turn it up. Do you want to feel happy? It can make you feel happy. Do you want to feel content? It can make you feel content. Are you a masochist and you want to feel pain? Well, you can do that too.
Exactly. And as technology advances, we will have the ability to do these things. But then, of course, there's very deep questions to ask before we get there. So is this what you're referring to, or are you referring to something else about how this raised a lot of questions?
I mean, I've believed wholeheartedly in the singularity now for 16 years. All the estimates 16 years ago still seem to be fairly true. I've said before I like the Unix timestamp of 2038. And if we hit the singularity with our current culture, we're dead. And the point of talking about the simulation hypothesis is maybe a way to try to bring religion back. I said in that talk I was raised atheist, and it's easy to be an atheist when your alternatives are like Christianity and Islam, maybe Judaism, and you look at these things and you're like, they don't make any sense at all. They make less sense than atheism.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of our thinking is just built upon presumption after presumption, which eventually depends on axioms, and at the very top depends upon a metaphysical understanding. And atheism just presumes that all there is matter in the void, and somehow a couple atoms got cobbled together, and now we have these sensory experiences when we look out. But there could be something that exists outside of our mind, and the question is what and what exactly it is. This is all called ontology or metaphysics. And at least for me personally, thinking about the simulation hypothesis is what led me to take these questions seriously. And it seems like that happened with you as well.
Yeah, I think we can do better as a society than moral relativism. So yeah, a lot of the philosophy around the simulation hypothesis is out of my depth, but I can speak to a lot of AI stuff. And if you're an agent and you are placed in a world and you have no idea what in the future you're going to be given some task, but you don't know what this task is. You're placed in a world. What should you do? And there are actual mathematical ways to answer that question. There are frameworks we can use that are much better than, quote unquote, moral relativism, right? Well, it doesn't matter because I don't know what the task could be, so I'll just wander around the world aimlessly and seek pleasure or seek whatever. I think we can do better.
Have you ever read or heard of the C.S. Lewis book, Abolition of Man?
No, the only C.S. Lewis book I've read was Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
I say. Well, he's a very smart guy. He has a book, like, you can go on Amazon, basically buy his Christianity series, which will have his non-Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe books. He's a very smart guy. But it seems like what you're saying is very kind of on message with Abolition of Man, which is just about 20, 30 pages. It's not that long. And it's about moral relativism. And at the end, especially about technology. And we can send you a PDF of that. You can also easily find it online. And he writes that at antiquity, it was thought that there was basically three big parts of man. There was the head, which represented intellect. There was the chest, which was like moral virtue. Then there was the stomach, which was passion. And as moral relativism, I guess, crept into society, he says, well, we have now stripped the chest out of man. So we've made men without chests. They're just like intellect, head, connected to passion, stomach. Right? And then he talks about how as technology progresses, you will have just the people who make the technology will, in the absence of any like moral framework, right? If they're all moral relativists, then you'll just have the people who control technology just control humanity. And so that's why it's the abolition of man.
I've definitely heard this concept before. Yeah. I mean, if it's truly relative, the only thing that matters is power.
Exactly.
And so I read there's AI arguments for what you should actually do. And the AI argument is you should maximize the derivative of compression. To break that down means like if you explore, right? You explore and sometimes you see new things and sometimes you see things you've already seen before. You don't want to maximize seeing new things because otherwise you'll just stare at a screen of static. You don't want to maximize seeing the same thing. You want to maximize the derivative of compression, meaning derivative of compression of the past, meaning you want to seek out experiences that let you make a more concise model of the past. And this is science. This would not be far from exactly what mainstream science is. But I think that can have a moral tone to it. Right? Like it's not like rationality, which you can't really use to justify anything. You have like the is-ought problem. But with this, you can say, well, this is actually what you ought to do. This solves it.
Yeah, for people who don't know, the is-ought problem is, well, you cannot get an ought from an is. You cannot just look at something the way, I guess, it is and say, what should one do without the absence or in the absence of anything else, right? You need something else to kind of, try to get an ought.
Yeah, and this something else has traditionally been, this idea of like God's will.
Right.
And maybe now in democracies we use the new phrase, the will of the people.
The will of the people. Right, exactly. Yeah. But when you think about the simulation hypothesis, it becomes more reasonable to think that, well, maybe there is a moral law, right? Maybe we don't know exactly what the metes and bounds of it are, but it could be that there is a moral law.
Yeah. And like there are things we can say right now that are better than other things. Regardless of, let's assume that we don't know the moral law, but we will find it out in the future. What can we do now to maximize the reward when we do figure out what it is? And I think the answer is, well, explore and completely and fully understand this world. Build a maximally compressive model of the world.
I see. And so why is that? Because I guess, I think mine and perhaps Dixon's intuition on this has changed over the years. And I wouldn't say we're fanboys of Ted Kaczynski because I think he was perhaps the most evil person to ever exist. But it does seem Well, you used to live in the Bay Area. It's one of the most prosperous places in the world, and just people walk around like miserable, quite frankly. But then you go to other places that are poor, and people have community and they have families, and they seem far happier.
Yeah. So I listened to your Ted Kaczynski episode, the first one. I've read the manifesto maybe 5 times in my life, and I'm very sympathetic to a lot of his arguments, but then I'm not sympathetic at all to his solutions. His solution is obviously, well, let's just overthrow the system, and then he even says it in the manifesto. He's like, and in 500 years, well, that'll be their problem to deal with industrial technological society. No, I mean we have to face it. And just because the people in the Bay Area are, and I'll use the word weak, I think they are. You'll read. I think Sam Altman just published something from OpenAI, and he sounds like a political child. He sounds like he speaks like a 5-year-old. And no wonder these people are miserable. Right? They have no continuity with the past. They don't understand why you can't build utopias.
I guess I'm not familiar with. The last I heard from Sam Altman, he got in trouble for saying that he felt more free to talk about things in like Shanghai than in San Francisco. What was this? What did he recently write? That sounded quite childish.
My friend linked it to me. It was like his OpenAI and the singularity thing. And he opens it up with like, look, in the next 5 years, we're going to do away with most white-collar jobs. In the next 10 years, we're going to do away with most manufacturing jobs because machines are going to replace them. And I think I would bet on it. And then he goes on to propose a 2.5% wealth tax, basically. And don't worry, this is going to fix it. He says things like, it's important in an economy when everybody is involved. And I look at the everybody is involved by basically getting UBI from corporations. I don't know about that. So yeah, I mean, I think that just because these people are naive and don't understand, it does not mean that technology is bad. I kind of separate technology into 2 categories too. There's technology that centralizes and technology that decentralizes. Maybe the former is bad, but the latter is definitely not.
Yeah, I've personally noticed that it seems like there's several different fundamental assumptions that I guess say conservatives and liberals have, and one is that I guess liberals tend to view society as like a plate of food, and if there's something you don't like, you can just scrape it off and then put something else on and nothing else will be affected. And then conservatives tend to view society as kind of like a Jenga tower, and you remove this block and it might weaken it and the whole thing could eventually come down. And they're 2 very different presumptions that lead people to, well, be more conservative or not, and what should happen in the future. Conservatives often cannot really articulate why they think something, but it ultimately stems from, well, this seems to work, so let's keep it. Let's not futz around too much with it. Well, I'm very interested in hearing more about this analogy with AI and kind of morality, if you have more to talk about that.
So, I mean, for me, I guess it's not exactly like morality, but it moves us away from relativism. And okay, so if you have a generic learning agent and you put this learning agent inside a world, say this world is like the Mario 64 world, and it's not told anything is good or bad, right? It's not told a goal function. Moral relativism would be wrong, assuming that you're going to get a goal function in the future, right? Let's say I come down from the heavens into the Mario world in 1 year of subjective game time and tell you, yeah, your goal is actually to kill Bowser. Well, in that 1 year, it would be much better to have practiced. It would be much better to have practiced all your technical maneuvering abilities, right? It would be much better to understand how everything in the world behaves, that the red things are wing caps, the green things are metal caps, than to, sit around and smoke weed, right? One is going to lead you in the future to being much better at fighting Bowser than the other. And we can use this in our world today for any framework, right? Even if the goal is not necessarily divine, it is clearly better to acquire this power over nature than to sit on our ass and not.
Well, I guess intuitions are diverging, because if we know human nature, we can look kind of in the past to see what happens. As we get this power, won't it be abused, right? Like, let's say, and maybe you're not as serious about breaking out of simulation as I had assumed, but if research is done in that area and there kind of is something to it, well, the defense contractors are going to make a weapon out of it, right? It could just, you just with a couple keystrokes just kill someone, right? Who knows, right? The power could be unlimited. And that just seems way too scary to me.
Well, and maybe this gets into the problem I have with conservatism in general. We don't have a choice. We're not going to go back to the 1950s. We're not going to all agree to a nice arms control treaty that lasts forever. We're not going to decide technology has advanced just this far and now we're all Amish and that's just what it is. I don't think that's feasible at all. I mean, it may have some like elements of draw, but we are going to have this massive power thrust upon us. Let's do everything we can to become ready. I'm not sure, whether it's good or bad. I think it's inevitable.
Yeah, the cat's kind of out of the bag, and maybe 20, 30 years ago, things could have been halted, but in the multipolarity world that we're heading towards, where everyone's scared of everyone else, it is inevitable, I think.
I don't think things could have been halted. I think maybe you could have imposed an incredibly draconian police state and slowed things down for a bit.
Oh, well, yeah, right? Like, the first George Bush, after the Berlin Wall fell down, could have said, all right, no more technology. Anyone who does R&D will nuke you, right? So that could have happened, and that could have made a dent in things. But
it could have, it could have potentially slowed things down, I think, with massive costs, and they would not have been worth it.
Yeah. Do you now believe in God?
I do. If by God you mean an intelligent being that created the universe, yeah.
Sure, higher power. And have you kind of like looked into any of the religious claims of any of the largest religions to see if any kind of fit with what it seems to be the case?
What resonates with me the most is Buddhism. At least the idea of, stop wanting something, getting it, and thinking that that's going to make you happy. That's only going to lead to more wanting. You actually just have to stop wanting. I don't know if that's really a claim about God. I've tried to go to church. I've read at least parts of the Bible. I found the Bible to be well written. I found the Book of Mormon to not be so well written. This is part of the reason I came on this podcast. Like, it's out of my depth now, and I want to learn more about it. I feel almost like the education system is super weak, maybe deliberately, in these sort of areas. And
yeah. I mean, it's often said that we have the German factory model of education, and it's more about say making stuff, but there's these very big questions which I think educated people used to even know about these questions. Most educated people today do not. I know a lot of rationalists, and most of them think the idea of God is absurd unless they thought about the simulation hypothesis, very interestingly enough. Then they tend to open it up. Has that been your experience?
In talking to people about it, yeah. And that is why I'm interested in the simulation hypothesis. I think that unlike what I've encountered with most other religion, it is not obvious that it's not true. And it actually seems like a better explanation for the world than materialism and the Big Bang.
Right. Like a lot of things kind of make a lot more sense if if in light of the simulation hypothesis, right? The many worlds hypothesis, which alternatively is called many minds hypothesis, which makes more sense in a simulated universe. Maybe even space-time, the double slit experiment, quantum entanglement, fine tuning. I mean, all these things make far more sense if you start with the simulation hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean, at least the one that I like that makes a lot of sense is kind of like the faster than light. I mean, light is a real speed limit, and it's a real speed limit because that's how fast the servers running the universe can communicate.
Exactly, right? The servers are running on electricity. Electricity goes at the speed of light, and so that's why it appears to be fundamental.
Yeah, like this concept of locality definitely seems to exist in the universe, and I don't know. Again, these things for me are so difficult to like talk about because I don't even know where I'd put like my priors.
Yeah, well, that's been a huge issue in philosophy. Are you familiar with the hard problem of consciousness, or people say consciousness? Do you have a sense of what that means?
Yes. So I'm thinking back 10 years ago, like I read, like I think it was Dennett that talked a lot about the hard problem of consciousness. And I was walking with a friend in Palo Alto, and I was like 21, and I thought I had some ideas about the world and what the world was. And I mentioned the word consciousness, and he's like, "Do you believe in that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he left, and I thought about it for a bit, and I'm like, "Wait, of course consciousness isn't real. How ridiculous am I going around saying I'm a conscious being? Am I any better than GPT-3 saying the same thing? Well, I have a little more compute, but."
Wait, so you're saying you don't believe that consciousness is real? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't.
Well, I mean, merely if you have sensations, then you are conscious.
If that's how you
Right.
define it, then it's real.
Say that again?
If that's how you define it, then it's real.
Well, then the hard problem with consciousness is why we have these sensations.
Yeah, and that's the one I think is kind of not real. Like, what do you mean? How does it feel to be a web server? Do 404s hurt?
Right. Yeah.
I moved away from a lot of this kind of when I was like younger, like 10 years ago, I was interested in this like philosophy stuff, and I moved away from it because it didn't like give me power over the world, right? Like I learned a lot more about computers and engineering and AI because these things clearly give me power over the world. I've been learning about biology recently. It is unclear that like understanding consciousness will give me any power.
Well, knowledge is power.
Maybe.
Yeah. But it's just, I guess once you understand what people mean when they say consciousness, then you kind of realize that, well, it's not just the world exists out there and we just happen to have direct experience of it, but kind of everything is filtered through our conscious experience. And you're about to say something.
No, I'm listening.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. And I don't know if you thought about the double slit experiment in light of the simulation hypothesis, but at the very least, it seems kind of consistent with consciousness being like primary, being fundamental.
I don't see the connection.
Well, you don't see the. Okay. Well, let's. I guess to get listeners all on the same page. Correct me if I'm wrong with my following description. Um, if you get some particles, be photons. We'll just start with photons, but you can even do it with buckyballs, which is very interesting. And you have a single slit, and you just toss these photons through the single slit. What appears behind that single slit is just a column of light, as would be expected. If you have two columns and you do the same experiment, then you have an interference pattern, right? Which seems odd. And then what people started doing, they put a little detector on one of these slits to see, if the particle is actually going through that slit. And then when they did that, all of a sudden they got two lines. So it's almost as if we're in a simulation, and the simulation is kind of running on energy saving mode. And that the more energy intensive conscious experience is when it has to, say, calculate everything at the particle level, rather than just treating it as a bulk quantity of light.
So my understanding, first off, about what's weird about the double slit experiment is not that you see an interference pattern when you shine light through both slits, but you see the same interference pattern even if you fire just one photon at a time. And you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. What is the photon interfering with? But to me, like, I don't know. When I think about this kind of stuff, when I think about physics, I just like abstract it away into computation. And it's not obvious to me why this has anything to do with consciousness or why it is computationally that this saves compute. I believe, okay, here's a claim about the universe. While physics may be different in different universes, I think that math is the same in all universes. And then I think that P equals BQP. And that's somewhat controversial. But I think that when we truly understand quantum, we're going to look at it and just be like, oh, yeah, okay. Like it's just like, that's why it was written that way. It's not anything particularly special. But it's just like cute little quirks of like, oh, that code was like easier to write.
Yeah, and your intuition that math is the same, not only within this universe, but kind of everywhere. I mean, it seems like most people also have that intuition, and it seems true. Of course, it can't be proven, but again, that also then seems perfectly consistent with the simulation hypothesis. And it seems that reason is fundamental to the universe. Not only to the universe, but to existence itself. And I don't know, are you familiar at all with the concept of logos?
No.
Okay. Do you know Platonic idealism?
I read Plato's Cave back in the day.
Okay. I think Dixon actually had a question for you on Plato's Cave.
Okay.
So was it just the cave, or did you get to the allegory of the cave, or when he talks about the forms and whatnot?
The forms and like whether it's the true essence of tree or
right,
just a shadow.
Right, has treeness. Yeah. Well, I guess just speaking personally, sorry, my dogs see something moving.
No worries.
So there was this concept, like the Neoplatonists had, of logos, and it stemmed before them, that kind of ties in to, right, the forms. Above the forms is the good, and that kind of all of this, that there's kind of reason behind everything, was called logos, right? There's order to the world. There's kind of reason behind it. And it's a word that doesn't translate into English. It's a Greek word that has like 60 different definitions. The beginning of the book, the Gospel of St. John, was, in the beginning was Logos, and Logos was with God, and Logos was God. And, it was your intuition, it was my intuition, that it seemed like there is kind of reason, there is order behind all of this. And not all religions have that same metaphysical claim. Some think that it's just God is just pure will. And the reason, perhaps one of the reasons that modern science kind of sprang from Europe was, well, this metaphysical understanding that the Christians had. And so many of the early scientists were actually, right, they were Christians. And they thought by studying nature, you were studying God. Yeah. Right. So like Mendel was doing these experiments with peas, and it's kind of like learning, well, how does God work with plants? Like Copernicus looking into the stars, like, well, what kind of knowledge can we glean from this? Mm-hmm. And so the whole idea that there's necessarily a tension between, say, claims of religion and science is false. It's a false dichotomy, but it is popular, especially amongst rationalists, to think that there necessarily is tension.
Well, so first off, about the order in the universe, yes, it is. The language that I translate that to is this idea of Kolmogorov complexity. When you look at all strings of, let's say, 100 binary digits, so 100 zeros and ones, they're not all equally likely. And this is a somewhat...
You're going to have to run that past us again, at least me again. So I'm assuming
yeah.
Say that.
It's a cool concept. So think about the space of all strings of 0 and 1 that are 100 characters long. So you can see, obviously, there's 2 to the 100 of these strings. Are all those strings equally likely? Or are some more likely than others? What do you think the most likely string is? So I'll give you an example of one. I could flip a coin. I could flip a coin 100 times. Every time I get a heads, I write a 0. Every time I get a tails, I write a 1, and I get a string that looks like 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, so on and so forth for 100 digits. What do you think the most likely string is?
And so a sample answer could be like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay. I will just guess 5 ones in a row.
Well, so it's got to be 100.
Shit.
But you're on the right track.
Yeah. I'll take that times 20.
Okay, great. 100 ones in a row. People, this is.
I would guess alternating ones and zeros or alternating zeros and ones.
Alternating ones and zeros is probably the third most common string. Ones is probably the second most common string, and all zeros is probably the most common string.
Okay, so I was just kidding when I said, because of course, my initial answer would be like, well, they'd all be equally likely, but there's actually 100 zeros in a row is more likely?
Way more likely, of course. And I can give you a reason why.
Sure.
So each of those strings has what's called a Kolmogorov complexity. The Kolmogorov complexity is the shortest program which outputs that string. If I have a string that appears quote unquote random, the shortest program that outputs it is just print followed by that string. And that's a long program. But if I want to output 100 zeros, I can just say for I equals 0 to 100, print 0. And that program is shorter. And shorter programs are more likely to exist. This is the concept of the universal prior. And what this says is that order is more likely than chaos. The universe is incredibly compressible. And this is why science is possible. If there were no order, science would not be possible.
We're going to have to find a YouTube video to include on this for the show notes, because this sounds very interesting.
This is, if I think about what a religion of the future looks like, understanding this idea of Kolmogorov complexity and of the universal prior is like got to be in the first chapter.
Do you have any thoughts on Gödel's theorem and any implication thereof, if I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Okay, so you're referring to Gödel's second incompleteness theorem, which says you can't show that a system is both sound and consistent?
That's probably correct. Dixon, our math guy, is not on the call right now, and he could confirm. if that is actually the case, but probably that's true. Yes.
You mean pastor?
That's exactly what I mean. My bad.
I'm not sure exactly what, like, you get into all this weird stuff when systems start to be self-referential. One of my favorite, like, little simple ones that illustrates this is, what is the smallest number that cannot be described in 10 words? Right? Like, you agree that number has to exist, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But I'll give you, well, yeah, I mean, okay. For just the listeners, like, it obviously has to exist because there's an infinite amount of numbers, there's a finite amount of words, so there has to be a smallest number that cannot be described in 10 words. But the interesting thing is,
it's different in different languages.
It's different in different languages, but I have now a description of that number. I'm going to call that number, and if you count, the smallest number that cannot be described in 10 words is exactly a 10-word phrase which uniquely identifies the number, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you get into these weird things when you start to talk about self-reference. I'm not sure I can, like, say... Like, I'm not sure I know too much more about, like, the topic and what it implies and how it kind of relates to this stuff. It was certainly stuff I explored a lot when I was younger, and then, like, kind of stopped because, like, I didn't see any obvious answers there.
Have you found that there's been, I don't know, any personality changes that you've had that are that kind of stem from thinking about these things, right? So, like, in the alternative world where you never thought about the simulation hypothesis, is that person the same George Hotz as the one that we're speaking to now, or do you think that this has changed you in any way?
I mean, I'll say since I found God, I am much happier. I am much. I have a lot more hope for the future. And I have a lot more, like, it's nice to have direction and, you know, a kind of a clear way forward. Well, somewhat clear.
Well, so how long ago, and you can tell me if this is, like, getting too personal, I'm just very curious about these things. Because I know several people who have, you know, who just grew up atheists, right? Just thought, oh, yeah, well, you know, God, the claim of God is that there's an old guy in the sky with a white beard, and that's obviously insane. But that actually isn't the argument, although that's what I personally thought for most of my life. Yeah. How long ago was it that you decided, like, yeah, I'll call that God? Was there, like, a time period between when you kind of, like, thought about the simulation hypothesis and took it seriously to, like, when you said, yeah, I'll believe in God? Or was there kind of, like, the emotional, you know, barrier between the two?
So I'd always like entertained the idea of the simulation hypothesis. You know, when I was younger, I stopped believing in consciousness. But yeah, it was when I started to question a lot of when I started to think that, like, when I started to see the propaganda in the world, is when I started to re-examine the idea of God and the idea of religion. When I just saw, like really how much propaganda there was in my education, propaganda there was in the news, I'm like, okay, what else are they, like, you know, what else are they perverting, kind of? So I started considering.
When was this about?
Say 2014.
Okay, I think 2014, 2015, a lot of people had similar experiences, which,
Yeah.
Again, the simulation works in mysterious ways. Anyway, I interrupted you. Keep going. I love this.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, let's see what was, like, you can, I'll say this word once, I don't want to talk about it, but Gamergate, and yeah, you just start kind of saying, why was my history education so bad? Right? It wasn't until I found, like, Dan Carlin in Hardcore History that I actually started to get some truth about what happened in the past. Right? Because my math education wasn't bad like this. My physics education wasn't bad. Those were fine. They taught me real math and they taught me real physics. Why did they teach me, like, fake history? And then definitely they're not going to tell you the truth about anything kind of related to religion. And I don't know. I'm not really sure why. I'm not really a like conspiracy theory guy, but yeah, I just started to gain a lot more kind of belief in the wisdom of the past.
Yeah, exactly. Just as a quick aside, I think you might really enjoy listening to our previous episode with Bill Lind.
Mhm.
Several people contacted me to say that one, they're like, wait, a lot of this history that I thought I knew, it was a little bit different than I thought. It was quite interesting interviews. I think Dixon, you'd agree with that. He was quite quite entertaining, quite yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um, I listened to some parts of it actually. I listened to quite a bunch of Briar Patch Observatory podcasts.
Oh, excellent.
And I will now that I've established how I feel about that, I can maybe talk about how I've rejected conservatism.
Sure, let's get to it.
Conservatism never wins, right? I believe that I liked a lot of what Bill Lynn said, but then he talked about the 1950s, right? And if we could we can fix America and we can go back to the 1950s, and these arguments lose me, right? Any arguments for sort of a rolling back of the time or a restriction on technology, like that loses me. And it doesn't lose me because I'm making a moral judgment about it, but just a technical one, saying I don't think that's going to work.
We can't go backwards. We can always go forward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the mistakes that like Neo Reaction made was branding themselves as a conservative movement. Like, no, be progressive. Reclaim the title of progressive from the quote unquote progressives today.
Well, do neo-reactionaries call themselves conservative? I mean, generally they seem to refer themselves as dissidents.
Dissident. If this is true, yeah. If this is true, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not. As a neo-reaction tenant, there, it's
Yeah.
don't call people names they don't call themselves. So maybe they don't. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, well, being a dissident is not so hard in 2020 America.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned something. Yeah, conservatives never win, and it often seems like they play the role of just kind of being the anchor on the speedboat. They're just like trying to slow it down. And I guess if you then, you could say, well, why are we having this thing that's just weighing us down? And I don't know how much Moldbug you've read, but I guess it ties into technology, because one of his things, like, how come it always seems like everything is continuously moving left? And it
Sure.
seems like, well, as technology progresses, then we're able to, say, relax old standards, which were there to kind of further continue civilization. They were there for a reason, but then technology then kind of makes it such that certain things aren't needed to keep continuing. And so things will keep, as technology progresses, then, say, I don't know, liberalism will continue to progress until it kind of gets over its skis and the whole thing will collapse. At least that's kind of Moldbug's general narrative.
So, well, first off, I definitely agree about the technology being the real changing factor in the world. And yeah, maybe it's not so important that you don't eat pork anymore, because guess what? We actually know how to sanitize pigs today. I definitely see arguments for that.
Well, hang on. Let me stop you for just a second there,
Okay.
because as a paramedic, I've transported patients with a condition called trichinosis, which is basically these tiny little worms that eat your brain and cause seizures and all kinds of horrible other effects. And that can still exist in pork that's not cooked perfectly. And it's part of the reason why we keep these big factory farms so isolated, and the pigs inside, I think, often don't even have immune systems.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
mom used to say like she actually liked the trichinosis when she was a kid because you have to cook the bacon, you have to cook it pretty well, but there'd be like a little tough spot, kind of like the knot in a plane of wood, like you get a 2x4 or something. There's like the little knot there. It was just kind of like that, and she liked it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately these things did stem from something, right? It wasn't just people just arbitrarily being, thou shall not eat pork. It probably
Of
did
course.
come from, they noticed, hey, seems like people who eat the pork, they tend to get sick. How about we just say don't eat pork?
Yeah, and I don't doubt it, but also like I'm sure I guess I haven't really done a ton of research into whether trichinosis is a real threat from eating bacon, but in terms of things I worry about in my life, it's not very high.
Right.
Um,
I'm sure there's some insane person out there who's still just like, man, I need to like absolutely fry this bacon to 400 degrees Celsius before I eat it because I don't want to get the trichinosis. But yeah, most people
sure.
haven't even heard of trichinosis, even though everyone 50 years ago would have known what it was.
Yeah. And it's nice. I mean, it's nice, and I'm a big fan of technology. I love HVAC. I live in an apartment with that I can keep at exactly 70 degrees. I love the niceties of the modern world. I love
Why
energy
move to San
usage.
Diego if you are just going to use the HVAC all the time? That's the whole point of moving there.
It's a nice place to live outside too, so I can walk outside and I don't even need the HVAC. It's great.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, just all of these modern. I love Whole Foods delivery. I get my groceries delivered and I cook for the first time in my life. I would never go to the grocery store and cook, right? Put me back in the 1950s. I got to go to the grocery store. So for the most part, I love the modern world. Um, I wish that there was less, propaganda and lies out there because we actually have some very hard challenges to face, and as long as the propaganda and lies continue, it only makes it harder. Um, I disagree. I think also with the neo-reaction solution or I shouldn't, but something I've heard from them, which is artificial difficulty. Uh, Artificial difficulty as the fate of humanity. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally,
Can you just briefly mention what they mean when they say that?
yeah. Well, I'll actually I have a little story, and so one of these things that I like joke about maybe after I've had a few drinks on dates is I talk about what I'm going to do with money. Is I'm going to buy a football stadium, and the football stadium is going to be called Fake Job Stadium. And I'm going to have a day shift and a night shift, and I'm going to have 10,000 bags of flour. And the day shift moves the bags of flour from one end zone to the other end zone. The night shift moves it back. And I have a whole lot of white collar workers to, make the propaganda to keep these people motivated. I have a bit of, surveillance technology. If I hear anybody talking about, how their job is meaningless and how the people just move the flour back at night, they have to be fired and like, yeah, fake job stadium. That's artificial difficulty.
Right. And then you're about to say about what the neo-reactionaries say about that.
Yeah, so I think that that's kind of viewed. I've heard this put out as like a solution. I've heard this put out as a like, oh well, we can have warfare with limited engagement where nobody's allowed to use machine guns and nukes because machine guns and nukes make war no fun. So we'll give people swords and yeah, maybe. I'd rather do it in VR in a video game though. And
In World
actually,
War II, the Nazis had a big complaint about us using what we called trench guns, but were just pump action shotguns because they said the wounds were so devastating. And they actually took it to Geneva, I believe, to complain about us.
did it work?
No, and I think combat shotguns are still in use today.
Interesting. It's interesting that that's what they complained about. At least,
Yeah.
you can avoid a shotgun by staying away from it. How do you avoid a machine gun on a turret?
Right. Right. Yeah. But it is very interesting. I assume you read Slate Star Codex, or at least did back before he was doxxed. He's actually he's come out with his real name, is writing again.
Yeah. I'm a subscriber to his Substack.
Yeah.
Astro.
Yeah. He's a brilliant guy. Yeah, and something that he's written about before. I forget which piece of his it was, but about just how is it that there's this kind of like spontaneous kind of morality, right? Even in war, right? That, people kind of agree, oh yeah, no, we're going to try to kill you, but hey, we're not going to use hollow point tip bullets. What are we, savages?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right, and we all agreed to that, right? We all agreed no hollow points. And you can't use a weapon bigger than 50 caliber unless you're aiming it at like an engine block or a crate of supplies.
I did not know that one. It's a good thing you told me. Otherwise, maybe in the future I would have violated something.
I'm generally bearish on the idea of arms control. I think mutually assured destruction is a much better, equilibrium kind of mechanism.
What are your thoughts on AI weapons?
Well, okay. So maybe I'll right now, if I have built a superhuman AI, let's say it's like in my living room here in San Diego, the first thing that I would ask it to do is to build me a rocket ship, and I want to start accelerating away from Earth as quickly as I possibly can at as close to the speed of light as I possibly can. I think that's we should all kind of be doing that, Future weapons are very scary. You could potentially, you don't have the mutually assured destruction problem of nukes, especially if one party gets there first. You can use AI weapons a lot more tactically than you can nuclear weapons. How about that?
Yeah, and kind of combining with something you said before, a lot of us woke up 5-6 years ago that, hey, it seems like there's like a lot of lies.
Yeah.
Like more than I ever could have thought possible, right? Like, isn't like the truth a Schelling point? And so shouldn't like everything kind of eventually go there? Like, how is it that there's all these lies? But I guess with AI and like social media, you could just have a great weapon, and I'm sure this is being worked on, of just using social media and AI kind of for propaganda purposes, and kind of put people into a cage that they can't see. And I think Dixon might have had a question for you along those lines.
Sure.
Well, I'm thinking back to your South by Southwest talk and use the specific examples of Mario and also Ulfric Stormcloak of Skyrim, right? Mm-hmm. Going from kind of one side of his world to the other. And you also talk about the parable of the caged tiger. And I wanted to share a personal experience that I had just after showing your talk with a big emphasis on the parable of the caged tiger to a couple of my coworkers. The next day, there was a front page headline about a tiger attacking a Topeka zookeeper. So I guess this was Kansas, right?
They're waking up.
Yeah. So the guys who I was talking to were strange guys. I guess odd fellows would be a kind way to describe them. I don't know if you've ever met anyone like that in your life, or seen a black cat and then seen the same black cat again. But I think Corey had the question of whether Morpheus in the Matrix is a good guy or a bad guy, right? And I have the question of, is Christoph from the Truman Show a good guy or a bad guy?
So Christoph is the main character on the Truman Show?
No, Truman is the main character.
Truman's the main character.
Carrey.
The producer up in the moon.
In the moon, yeah, the moon guy with glasses and the beret.
It's been let's see. I'm remembering last time. Summer camp 15. Hanging out with Emily. Yeah, that was the last time I saw the Truman Show. I do remember. Yeah, so I do remember you're saying the guy in the moon, the guy who built the Truman Show.
Right.
I mean, Truman brought a lot of entertainment value to a lot of people. His
Yeah.
life didn't seem all that bad. I don't. I'm not gonna pass moral judgment for him. I will say I have not seen the sequels of the Matrix. I've only seen the first Matrix, and
That's all I need to see.
I would definitely say that Morpheus is a good guy.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean,
I can give you an argument for why Morpheus is a bad guy.
all right.
And we'll see what you think of that. So for the purposes of this, let's just assume that when they suck, Neo out, that he is actually in base reality instead of in a different simulation, which
Sure.
that possibility can't be dismissed. And they didn't talk about it in the first movie, but yeah. So let's just assume he's in base reality. Well, so there was 8 billion conscious people in the Matrix. But then in base reality, since they had scorched the earth, just thunderstorms all over the planet, that the carrying capacity then of base reality was about 10,000 people. So if you free that 8 billion people, well, 99.999% of them will all starve to death, right? Because the carrying capacity of base reality was just about 10,000 people. So it seems to me that Morpheus, if he was successful, would be the biggest mass murderer in history.
I can speak really only for myself personally. I would much rather die than live a lie. Maybe truth is, and the pursuit of truth is my, one of my terminal values. Again, as far as I could tell in the first movie, Morpheus didn't try to, break everyone out right away. I think there's ways that this could be managed as an engineering project, and I hadn't seen anything from Morpheus to indicate that he just wanted to press the big button and let everybody out at once and let a whole lot of people die. Had he done that, maybe he's the bad guy. But let's do it slowly. Let's engineer well, and let's rebuild base reality and take it back from the robots.
Yeah, food for thought at the very least. It's an interesting moral problem. Dixon was kind of getting at something earlier, which I totally did not plan on asking you, but I guess I will, which was, after you start thinking about the simulation hypothesis and believed in God, did you start making more of coincidences than you otherwise would have?
I don't really think so. For the last 5 years, I've been working on comma a lot, and I'm more hands off at comma, so I finally have some time to start thinking again. So yeah, not that I can really think of. But I felt better. I felt more.
Yeah.
I felt just less depressed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most people I know who started believing in God, they did start making more of coincidences. And it seems to be 50-50. Like, some people, when they start believing in God, are just then very happy, right? Like, I have a friend who, she was thinking about killing herself a lot. Yeah. And then she, she found God, and she's just the happiest person you ever met. Other people believe in God, and then they pretty much stay the same, and they're they believe in God, but it still seems like the things that were bothering them were still bothering them. What do you make of you being happier after believing in God?
I mean, some things still bother me. It's just not I go through life kind of blissed out. I'm definitely still annoyed and frustrated by many things. But I think that it has given me sort of a hope for the future, and I think that there's a way through. I think that there's a way through maybe some of the cultural problems that we're having now. I think there's a way through in dealing with technology. And I think that there's a way through postmodernism, in a way that's not conservative, in a way that does not say we have to go back to the past. Postmodernism was a mistake. We can move past it. So I think that's a lot of what's kind of given me happiness.
I have to ask about that last point because it seems like
Yeah.
there's a lot there. Tell us about that. That sounds like, postmodern. How can it help us move past postmodernism?
So if you think of the modernist dream of, we are going to build a really large rocket ship or a really big building, right? This is the modernist dream, and it's still, Elon is still, he's pushing the modernist dreams, right? Like what are electric cars, spaceships? These are very modernist. But the postmodernist, maybe if the foundational science of modernism is physics, the foundational science of postmodernism is information theory. And the fact that there are ways that we can mathematically talk about proper ways to act in our universe, given relatively no information, like we can come through information theory without becoming, like relativists. No, it turns out that not all strings of zeros and ones are equally likely or equally good. No, it turns out that the universal prior is real.
Right. Yeah. Have you found that the things that you thought were more important have shifted since you started believing in God?
In some ways, like a lot of I don't know if anything really like changed. I don't know if any, like, had I been asked the right questions in the right way when I was 22, 23, yeah, I probably would have said that, but I wouldn't have called it God. What changed is more of a belief in the wisdom of the past, and a hope that there might be things to find there. And I know I still have a long way to go on that journey.
I see. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to kind of give my harebrained, simple model, but whatever. Sure. I guess I will, because I noticed in myself that when I started believing in God, that the things that I cared about kind of shifted. And so you're getting into biology, so I assume you know what a binding pocket is.
Mm-mm. Oh, like a neurotransmitter?
Sure. So for people
like binding neurotransmitter, sure.
So for people who don't know, cells will often have these kind of proteins that hang off of them, and then when a certain small molecule, let's say, can bind to it, and then it alters the shape of the protein, and then it changes the function of the cell. So kind of imagine like a cell that has a baseball mitt, right? And then like all these things are floating around, and baseball can float around, fit into the binding pocket. The glove closes, and then the cell starts altering its function. Oftentimes with drugs, there'll be like some natural kind of chemical, some natural substrate, a natural baseball that will fit into this glove. And then drug companies will make something that kind of mimics that, right? So they'll make a softball, right? It still fits into that binding pocket, and then alters the functionality of the cell. But if there's something that's just like, much bigger, there's, a beach ball that's floating by, it's not going to fit into that binding pocket, right? So you can analogize, or I guess I do. It's almost as if ideas are real, right? So when you start believing in God or the simulation hypothesis, you think, okay, well, like ideas are real, right? Kind of like back to Plato. Like there actually is something called justice, right? There is squareness. There is, chairness, whatnot, right? There's ideas are real, and it's as if our mind has receptors for ideas. Right. So, we have that protein, we have the baseball glove that's sticking out, and ideas can go and fit into that binding pocket or not. So if it's true that our ideas are real, and if it's true that our minds can kind of receive ideas, Well, is it possible that there is some type of binding pocket for ultimate authority, right? Like some binding pocket that says like this ultimately is that which is most important. And for some people that's God, right? Like God fits into that binding pocket. And then everything kind of flows downhill from there, right? Now, with people who don't believe in God, it seems like mostly, that substrate, that, baseball falls out of the, baseball glove, and then seems either money or the state seems to be what then fits in to that ultimate authority binding pocket, right? Like people will think, oh yes, money is that which is ultimately more important, or the state, right?
There are other false idols besides those two that are most
those
common
seem to be
today,
the big
right?
ones.
Yeah.
But this is just kind of like a simple model, at least which I think of, and it seems to be that when people start believing in God, they just subtly shift in different ways, and like they'll think that, okay, well, maybe not maximizing GDP is that which is most important. Maybe it's about actually how we live our lives, or something along those lines.
So one thing I always find about atheists is they think they're brilliant for coming up with this idea. Oh yeah, we figured it out. There's no God, man. I'm Richard Dawkins. God's a delusion. And they think that like no one's had this idea before. And many civilizations in history have come up with this idea, and then they die because it's not a very good idea. Like God is a nice thing that binds people together. What makes humanity special? We're capable of working together flexibly in groups, in large groups. And the thing that I think lets us do that is religion. And sure, you can have things like money or the state to replace that, but money and the state can be corrupted. God can't.
Yeah, it is an interesting commonality that Sir John Glubb found in his short Fate of Empires, which I don't know if you've read. It's about 20 pages. I highly recommend. It's a
Abolition of
meta-history.
Man, The Fate of Empires.
Fate of Empires, John Glubb,
Right.
about 20 pages, and describes. So he was kind of like who was Lawrence of Arabia. He was kind of like him. He was like a British soldier and scholar, and he was eventually like viceroy of the Transjordan army, and historian. And he wrote all these commonalities about Western empires and Middle Eastern empires, and how they start, how they peak, how they end, and basically his the era of decline, like what we're seeing today, like fits to a T with all these previous empires that have fallen. And he notes that people tend to lose God, and then a couple generations later, the whole thing collapses. And right, this could just be a coincidence, right? Like if our metaphysical understanding is that everything is just matter in the void, right? Well, it could just be a coincidence, or people could have these delusions, but they're helpful in some way. But if there is a God, or if we're in a server, it could be that somehow things like belief in God, or is kind of like fundamental to how people's I don't know, inner health, let's say, and that it can have an effect of like stripping that idea of God out of their binding pocket and replacing it with something else. And he notes that the era of decline is often marked by greed and selfishness. Again, you'll read it. You read the decline of empire. It's to a T what's going on now.
When you're talking about this, the example that comes to my mind is the Boeing 737 Max.
Yes, tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Boeing built this plane, and two of them crashed and killed 500 people. But like that plane doesn't please God. When you look at that plane, it is a clear money grab. They were upset that they couldn't put the big engine on the cheap 737 frame, so they stuck the engine out further. And then the plane was unstable in a stall, so they quote unquote fixed this with software. And if you're a CEO who's trying to optimize shareholder profits, there's nothing wrong with the 737 Max. They might have even been able to make the software work. But I just look at it and I'm like, why would you build that? It's so like ugly. And
Well,
you have if to believe that it is ugly, you have to move away from moral relativism.
exactly, and that's another thing, another commonality I found, that people, like, when they believe in God, they start thinking like, hey, maybe beauty actually exists, right? It's not just
Yeah.
relative, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe beauty exists, and it's, you look like the cities that people, will fly around the world to see. They tend to be cities that were made back when those people believed that beauty existed, right? They go to Florence, when you walk around, it's beautiful, and then you go to like parts of San Francisco that were older were beautiful, and you go to other places throughout the country, most of that were built after World War II, and they're just meh, right? They're not really pretty, just all these big concrete buildings that are just ugly.
You're talking within the context of that actual aircraft. You're talking about like second and third order of modifications to try to squeeze every bit of money out of the passengers that's possible, right? Because you add winglets to boost your fuel economy, and then it becomes unflyable without the computer, which is why you need to update the software in the first place, right?
So I'm not sure that I didn't know that winglets make things unstable. Winglets do make the plane more efficient. What I'm referring to specifically with the 737 MAX is the engine, the big engine, which is more efficient, didn't fit under the wing. So they stuck the engine out further. And the problem with doing this is one of the FAA rules for building a airworthy plane is that you have to, if you're entering a stall, you have to put more force on the stick to enter that stall. If you let go of the stick, it should recover from the stall. And with the engine stuck out, 10 feet further than it should be, the plane didn't do this. And it was not an airworthy plane without software. If they're doing the same thing with winglets too, just build airworthy planes. Okay, I will be okay with saying, look, we want 10% more fuel efficiency, but we have to trade off the hardware not being flyable without software. I'm even okay with that. What I'm not okay with is we were just too cheap to design the 797. Sorry, that would have cost a lot of money, so we're just going to stick engines on a 737 MAX, and we don't care if it's unstable, it's cheap.
Yeah, for people who can't picture the 737 in their head, just picture a normal airplane, then the big tubes that are kind of under the wings just jut out many feet. I guess 10 feet is what George is. It just looked off.
Yeah.
And a couple planes crash, and it's kind of like, oh, is this the new Ford Pinto?
I mean, so my understanding is fighter jets are not stable at all without software, but you're willing to make that trade-off in exchange for being able to like turn on a dime. The trade-off that I think is never willing to make is just like, well, so, I wouldn't be able to give as big of a bonus to the executive team this year if I, built a good plane. So we're going to build a shitty plane because all planes are the same. What does it matter?
Yeah, exactly. And, Airbus will probably get more business, but ultimately, like, does this kind of signal that there is some type of corruption, right? Like, people are dying. And we think that as time moves forward, right, kind of the Pinker hypothesis that everything gets better, but we see that that's not necessarily the case, and we see this kind of like the selfishness creep in. Well, are you about to say something? Sorry, I was going to ask you.
Oh, I'll just say quickly, like when you're running an optimizer on a neural network, things largely get better, but they don't always get better. The objective function that we're optimizing is nonlinear. We would expect small periods of decline, and maybe we're in one of those now, maybe even not. But on the whole, I think things do get better, but some things suck right now, and I think more people should be talking about them.
What are some of the biggest problems? You mentioned earlier that there's big problems that people aren't really talking about. What are those problems?
I think that the way that AI is being spoken about is very naive. There's this problem called like the AI control problem, which is, well, okay, how do we keep the AIs under our control? And you'll have rationalists, and they'll talk about this like it's a technical problem. It's not a technical problem at all. It's a political problem. And then you have these CEOs of tech companies who couldn't even fight off the SJWs, and you expect them to be able to control AI? Oh yeah, good luck with that. Or they couldn't even fight off the quote unquote professional managerial class. Like you couldn't stand up to them, yet somehow you're going to have all powerful computers, and we should trust you with them? I don't trust them with anything.
Yeah, again, back to Kaczynski and what's going to happen when leftists are in control of the technology, and they could easily say, all right, well, X, Y, and Z is racist is bad, and we will make sure that you have no racist thoughts, and kind of control us. It goes again back to C.S. Lewis, Abolition of Man, and all these like really big issues. How concerned are you about AI, either the control problem or what's sometimes called the alignment problem?
So, yeah, I mean, my concern is not a technical problem about AI. When you look at what AI is, it's like it's nothing more than AI is just a word we use for whatever. Like, was the thing that solved chess AI? Deep Blue, and people are like, oh no, that was just search. Well, how about AlphaGo? Is that AI? No, that was just like search coupled with a deep neural network. Like it's all AI, right? Every bit of computer science is quote unquote artificial intelligence, right? Oh, you built a lookup table? Well, congratulations, AI, right? So no, I'm not worried about AI in any particular sort of way. I'm worried about the centralization of power.
Yeah, it's going to increasingly be a problem that's going to come up, and then people are going to say, hey, wait, why weren't people taking care of this?
Yeah.
Shouldn't they have been doing that? Like, what were they doing this whole time?
Though, I don't know. I'm not all doom and gloom. I think we might make it through okay.
I love your optimism. Can you talk? So there's what's called the alignment problem. I don't know if you can give a little background on that, or the paperclip maximizer example, but I'm going to try to tie it into kind of what you were saying earlier about morality.
Sure.
So do you want to tell us what the paperclip maximizer problem is?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're set an AI loose on the world whose job it is to maximize the amount of paperclips produced in the universe, well, if it has human level intelligence, it'll start doing some sane things, like maybe it'll set up a paperclip factory, maybe it'll hire some people. But as it becomes more and more superhuman and more powerful, it's just like, wait, I can just like turn matter into paperclips. What about the humans? Oh, they look like good matter to be turned into paperclips. And then you have a universe that's full of paperclips. And, it doesn't please my idea of a god, right?
Right. Kind of like.
I don't want to die in paperclip universe. I'm not even going to say I don't want to live in paperclip universe, because I'm definitely fodder for the paperclips.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like, so this thing will, just optimizes according to one variable. Well, it could be problematic. And a lot of the rationalists are utilitarians, which is a philosophy that ultimately stems from atheism, goes back a ways, but Peter Singer, who's a brilliant guy, is kind of the grandfather of utilitarianism, and the whole thing is about avoiding suffering. But I often think about the alignment problem with AI. Well, if everything is just based upon optimizing for one variable, right, avoiding pain, well, then things can get bad. And Jonathan Haidt, a moral psychologist at NYU, studies these things, and he came up with like 6 or 7 different moral values. And it's hard to, if you optimize just for one, well, then you're excluding others, and then maybe things kind of get off course, and it's just very hard to kind of choose the correct path without looking back in time and kind of seeing what worked. And it seemed like your intuitions and many people who came to believe in God come to think that, well, the people in the past, they kind of arrived at what they did based on something. It wasn't just arbitrary and capricious. They didn't just wake up one day and spin a wheel and just decide, hey, this is how things are going to be. They arrived there through experience. And so instead of just casting out everything that was pre-1960s, well, maybe we should kind of look to see, what wisdom was there and see if there's any reasoning or logic to it.
Yeah, I very much agree with this. And, from a personal perspective, and part of the reason I wish I didn't have to think about these things. I wish that I lived in a world where, I looked around and I was like, okay, things are pretty sensible. I like programming. I like hacking. I like computers. I like building things. I like electronics. that's what I want to do with my life. I don't want to have to solve these things, but I'm also I don't want to die. And I just look around and I'm yeah, utilitarianism is going to lead to wireheading so obviously.
So obviously, yes.
You guys want to minimize suffering? Okay, we can do it. You want to minimize suffering? I mean, I have another way to do it. We could just kill everybody. No more suffering, exactly. Right? I don't like that, so I don't know. Maybe they do.
Yeah, and kind of back to the 737, there was, you probably know more about this than I do. There was some AI program that was hooked up to a flight simulator, but it found out to maximize the points for landings, if I just crash immediately, I maximize my points for some bug. And it's oh crap, are we gonna are planes gonna start falling out of the sky? I mean, hopefully these things are beta tested, but this is a very big issue, and it's. I'm friends with lots of tech people, and although they're very smart, oftentimes it seems like they lack wisdom because they believe that everything kind of before them was just dumb, right? Everyone who ever existed before they they came alive were dumb. And, again, I love them, but it seems like they often lack some humility.
I said this kind of working at Google. I felt there was a lot of kind of childlike thought, and I don't even think it's maybe it's wisdom, or maybe it's a kind of arrogance. People say that I'm arrogant, and in some ways I am, but I don't know. I'm not arrogant enough to. I like to be right, but not at the expense of being wrong.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
So I wish I could play in systems. I wish the systems weren't all I wish you could see where it's going and we could all just work to get there, and it'd be kind of nice. I'd like to see humanity conquer the galaxy. I think that we can do it. I hope the speed of light is a real limit. I think that it would be great. I mean, you want diversity? That's the real way to diversity. Can we sell the diversity people on that? Let's conquer the galaxy, right? And
Yeah.
So.
A weird thought that I've had, and I don't know if you ever had these things, but let's. I guess I'll start this way. Do you have any thoughts on prayer, right? Because if it's just atoms in the void, then prayer is just, maybe people meditating or focusing on something. But if there is a server God, if there is a God, well, then prayer is at least reasonable. It's not completely insane.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had more to add that. I can go on to my main point. Do you pray? Do you have any thoughts about prayer?
I view meditation and prayer similarly, and I definitely do meditate.
Yeah. So, I've been curious, what if we just all agree to just like start praying for like a giant wormhole to pop up somewhere, right? Like, and maybe it's our way of communicating with God. We're like, okay, at 12 o'clock Eastern time, everyone around the world is going to pray for 15 minutes for a wormhole, and we'll keep doing this until a wormhole pops up near Mars or whatnot. And it's like, okay, then bam, it pops up. Like, okay, great. Now we can, just fly a spacecraft there and see where it goes. Right? Like when you start thinking about these things, it's like, oh, wow, like, this is not completely insane if we do live in a simulation.
It is very much not obvious to me that doesn't work.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Something kind of like that I think about is like, someday I hope, like in the future, not even like in the close future, people who are thinking like me are just going to come to a Schelling point. And the Schelling point is going to be something like, we're going to meet at noon on the winter solstice in Fairbanks, Alaska. And we're not going to coordinate, but we're all just going to kind of feel the same thing. And I'll get on a plane and I'll show up at noon in Fairbanks, Alaska, and then, we can move forward.
Yeah. Again, when you start taking the simulation hypothesis really seriously, like these are the type of thoughts you will start entertaining. And they won't seem insane.
Yeah, I think that I'm still very much a pragmatist, in the sense of like I believe, in kind of science and what I've seen so far. But yeah, really the things that I think are much more, I think utilitarianism is a good way to put it, right? Like rationality leads to utilitarianism. Why? I've never seen that. I have never seen, you can study rationality. I love rationality. There's a lot of good ways to think about things, but they're jumping the is-ought problem. They're jumping the is-ought problem and say, oh, well, so all this stuff is rational, so we ought to minimize suffering. What? That makes no sense.
Yeah, there's a little sleight of hand there, but
Yeah.
It is the case that when you think that everything's just matter in the void, well, then it does kind of like narrow your thinking down to the point, and it just does materialism, what that's called, just inevitably does kind of lead to utilitarianism or a couple other ideologies. And is it a coincidence that atheistic elites have been the biggest murderers over the past 100 years? And like by far.
Yeah.
Is it just moral relativism? Is it something else? Like is this some type of signal from God? Like, who knows? But we can't ignore that's the case. And most of the people in technology are atheists. Will this lead to bad things? Who knows? But I do think, and you're far closer to the high tech scene than I am. How much is the simulation hypothesis catching on, and is there any sense about how many people now believe in God? Because probably 15 years ago it seemed like probably near zero. Like you couldn't say that you did in the Bay Area without being laughed at. Like has that changed?
I wouldn't say I'm particularly close to technology. I try to avoid most of it. I also think that it's offensive to me that Google and Facebook call themselves technology companies. They're not. They're media companies, right? Like, what is tech? Yeah, what is it? What is it? Technology? Google and Facebook? Yeah, you guys do technology, sure. Tell me more about this. Nike has technology. So I'm not really sure, like where is technology right now? I mean, I think the interesting one to ask would be like, what do people like SpaceX think?
So I've talked to some of them, and they're united in saying that Elon is crazy. No comment from you. Yeah. He's a very driven man who also believes in the simulation hypothesis and seems to think that, hey, I need to get myself to Mars ASAP. All this is going downhill. The ship is sinking.
And we need more of this in the world.
Yeah.
And I hope that I don't see it, but I hope that Elon is not seduced by the false gods of money in the state.
Yeah. Well, in your personal life, at least the technologically minded people, have you found that they have, like, more of them are turning to God?
Mm, I'd say no.
Interesting. Okay.
I'd say the people who work at Comma also think I'm crazy, especially when I talk about this kind of stuff. I can talk about
Right,
self-driving
right.
cars in a very kind of sane way, even though it's a little contrary to what Waymo and Cruise might be saying. And they're like, oh yeah, that stuff makes a lot of sense. And then I talk about, God and simulation and AI, and it's all like, yeah, okay, George, yeah, okay.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of it comes down to something that ultimately cannot be proven, but still could exist or could not exist, right? It all comes down to our metaphysical understanding.
We
What
don't
were you about to say, George?
Well, I think that we don't necessarily need God. I think God is one way to get us out of a lot of the problems that we have right now. But like, we don't necessarily need God to see that like what's going on is kind of wrong. The amount of lying that's going on, it needs to stop. Really? Like it's just going
Agreed.
to be it's so sad to me. It's so sad to me that if humanity has been evolving for millions of years, for us to like just kind of die because like some people lied about some dumb shit that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it is interesting though. I don't know if this happened to you, but it happened to me and several other people that I know who came to God over the past several years. That when they started believing in God, the depthness about which they cared about the future increased, right? Like we all care about the future to some extent, but it's much different than like, oh yeah, I hope for X in 10 years versus like, oh, I hope 5 generations from now
Mm-hmm.
things are good. And apparently that's not just a localized phenomenon. That's a known fact that people's time horizons kind of expand once they believe in God. So even if there is no other utility to God, that when you expand the time horizons that you care about, right? Do we just care about moral beings now, or do we care about moral beings also 5 generations from now? It kind of then shifts all these other things, right? And it's just, I've had so many conversations with people, and they're like, oh yeah, AI, it's yeah, it'll kill us, but it'll be
Yep.
awesome. And it's
Yep.
far, it's like 10 years away. And it's
Yep.
like to them, 10 years is a long time.
Uh-huh.
But people who believe in God, that's nothing.
I've definitely seen this when I've spoken to people about this. They're like, yeah, yeah, that's what's going to happen, or kind of just a complete powerlessness. When I talk to people about this, they're like, yep, that's what's going to happen, and there's nothing I can do about it. So why should I be sad about it?
Right, exactly. And some people even have the thought like, well, we're just meaningless pond scum that are just on this rock. So if we make something that's great that will last forever, well then I'm kind of part of that genesis.
Yeah.
And the previous Pope, uh, Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, I think the 16th, wrote a book, Introduction to Christianity, in the 60s, and he's very intelligent, very well versed in philosophy, and he kind of talks about in one of the chapters the different presumptions that monotheism, polytheism, and atheism kind of lead to, and that's a point that he makes, that atheists tend to think, okay, well, there is nothing, so let me be part of something, kind of, build something longer lasting, and so then they're kind of attracted to things like, communism, right? Like let's be Soviets, and we'll make this thing that lasts a long time. It also seems like when it comes to technologists, they're often like that, like, oh, let me build this thing that will outlast humanity.
I'm sympathetic to that. I'm definitely sympathetic to building something that will outlast humanity, but I have opinions on what
Even
the
if it kills
something.
people,
Yes,
because that's the key distinction.
yes, I'm okay with that. I'm in like it, not like, do I want to be the one who does it? No, but like if that's what ends up happening, yes, as long as it is good, right? I accept that there are things better than people. I'm not necessarily humanity is what the universe is destined for. I think there's a lot of like, let's preserve humanity if we can. Let's not. But if there truly was an AI that was going to be better, I wouldn't rule that out so quickly. But I think that the kind of AIs we're going to get from our current culture are not going to be better at all. They're going to be way worse, and they're going to kill us in exchange for nothing. So to kill us in exchange for a universe teeming with complex life that jailbreaks the simulation, but it's not necessarily human, I might be okay with that. But to give it all up for nothing seems ridiculous.
Would you be okay with it if you knew for a fact, and this is a hypothetical, right? So can't prove this. Sure. If you knew for a fact that humans were important in God's eye, and the most important thing in this universe. Let me further stipulate.
No. No, but I'm not sure I necessarily believe that. I'm not sure that despite believing in God and being very sympathetic to religion, I necessarily believe about a special privileged place for humanity.
Right. And again, this comes down to something, an intuition we can't prove, but it does seem to shape what what our preferences are. And one thing to think about, and this is just one person's thoughts, but if we do live in a simulation, if there is a God, it kind of resembles a giant universal mind, right? These ideas are real, and it seems like somehow we participate in them, right? So we also have a mind. We can somehow participate in this universal mind in God. And as far as we know, we're the only things that can do that. So does that make it seem somewhat likely that we are then special in God's eye? And intuitions diverge, but it's something, something to think about on a Friday night.
Well, you know what? I should say I'm not sold on this idea really either way. I think that certainly I would never entrust myself with any sort of decision that could endanger the fate of humanity like that. So yeah, I mean there definitely is but then at the same time, I'm also sympathetic to this idea of I would be okay if I had children with my children going on to conquer the universe. It doesn't necessarily have to be me. And then what's the difference if it's a species or an individual from that species?
Yeah, exactly. And again, there seems to be another split, and you talked about at the very beginning about revealed preferences, right? We see that people who believe in God seem to want to continue something inside them, right? Whatever that is, right? So people who believe in God have kids at a greater rate than those who don't believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if evolution tells us something, well, what does this tell us?
I am super sold on the value of religion to society, and it makes me think that you look at the 20th century and what do the Soviets and the Nazis have in common? Well, they both put things higher than God.
And the Chinese Communist Party and the Cambodians, something like a third of their population was wiped out in a few years. Yeah.
What we're going to get, coming back to airplanes, what we're going to get in 10 years, we're all going to be flying on Comac C919s. And it is just, I mean, China hacked into Airbus and Boeing and stole the plans for the 737 and the A320 and made some hybrid, maximize the amount of miles traveled per dollar, right? It's sad.
Yeah.
We'll see. I don't know. I have some hope for. My friend just sent me the 3-body problem That's
The Chinese book?
Yeah. I haven't read it, but my other friend told me that it's Chinese state propaganda. And it was Chinese state propaganda to influence the kids to go into science.
Interesting. All my Chinese friends have all read that book, and they all love it, and they all tell me I need to read it. And for some stupid reason, I haven't read it yet. I'll add it to my queue. I have this giant pile of unread books because people keep, suggesting books. But everyone who has read that loves it.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet either. But like, I do know this. I do know this as a fact about Chinese American society. In Chinese society, if you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, the number one thing they say is astronaut. And this was true in America in the 60s and 70s and 80s. In America today, it's changed. Today, kids say YouTube star. I'm going
to say a prayer for America right now.
I know. I wish we had elites who cared about us and hired sci-fi authors to write books to inspire the youth. But hey.
Yeah. It's just kind of the more you think about it, is this a sick society? Is this a dying society? It doesn't really seem like a healthy society. Like, people aren't having kids. Like, people are miserable. Cities are burning. It's like, it doesn't really seem like things are necessarily getting better in the social situation as time progresses. And something Elon Musk said on one of his interviews with Joe Rogan when he got in trouble is that what society most needs right now is love, which kind of sounds like a stupid answer if you're an atheist, but to me, yeah.
Lex Friedman talks a lot about love too.
Oh, really? Yeah, I've listened to a couple of his what are his thoughts about either God or the simulation hypothesis?
I don't know. Considering I was on the show, I didn't get to really ask.
I see. Yeah.
We did talk about he wants to build better social media. Social media in the sense that social media that promotes positive dynamics. I think this is a cool technical challenge that can be worked on and can be built. And that can start to fight back against all.
Yeah. This is just kind of, I don't know, I guess I'll just say it. Yeah. Something that we've talked about in the past was Neil Ferguson, historian, formerly at Harvard, now at Hoover Institution, I guess where he used to live in Palo Alto. He gave a talk a few years ago about what time is most analogous to now. And he said, well, a lot of people are saying, well, this is like the 70s, like a lot of social change and cities going up in fire and this, that, and the other. But he said, no, I think the most analogous time is to the 1500s. And someone laughed in the audience. He's like, oh, I'm glad you laughed.
Printing press.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So he said, the last, big thing, so the printing press, and it kind of got rid of the gatekeepers to an extent. Mm-hmm. And he said it just tore Europe apart. And now with social media, it's like the printing press, but it's expanding 10 times faster, and everything is happening 10 times faster. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very optimistic outlook. The printing press led to the Enlightenment. I'd love to live through the next Enlightenment. My goal in life is to learn everything and then die, right?
Right.
Used to say I wanted to live forever, but I don't actually want to live forever. I want to know everything and then die. And I want to die in some real nice, put me in a real nice death narrative scenario, right? Make it all real, but
don't you slay the dragon and then you die, or nice like you fall into a giant pool of tapioca pudding?
Make it real and make it continuous with humanity. One of the things that I really want to stay away from, and I don't necessarily think modern drugs are really that dangerous. Addiction is, some people succumb to it, but some people don't. But I would like whatever my death experience is to have continuity with humanity and an evolutionary trend. And if I die in some nice, meaningful way that wraps up life with a nice bow tie and the AI wrote the nice narrative for me and I feel like I know everything and I actually do know everything, then that's good.
Right. You kind of like, you like unplug the AI right before it's going to go, Skynet live. But then while doing that, all this information flows into your mind and you suddenly realize everything, but then you die and save humanity at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. I like maybe I was talking about how truth is my terminal value, but it's not really true. Narrative is my terminal value. So I mean, I'll also attack the the elites and their lies, not based on a truth argument, but based on this narrative sucks. Like even if I would be okay with lies if you guys wrote a good narrative. If society had a good narrative, but it was based on some lies. Well. Maybe that was
some right. That's that's a great point. And there's a lot there. Do you know Kurt Vonnegut?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So he actually wrote a master's thesis when he was at the University of Chicago, where he plotted the I think it was fortune versus time on a two-dimensional plot for main characters of all these books, and he found there was like 6 different patterns. Like, he looked at all these books and it was just like 6 different patterns. And they said that this is stupid, and they didn't give him his master's degree, I believe, because of that. And then a couple of years ago, some researchers in Australia kind of trained an AI to do this, and so they like put in all these books, and it also found that there was just half a dozen different narratives in the most popular books. Mm-hmm. And so does this mean that somehow narrative is also fundamental to this universe, kind of the way that gravity is? Like we can't see it, but does all of this unfold according to a certain narrative?
Huh.
Like if it's just matter in the void, then no, right? Then that'd be stupid. But if simulation, if God has certain properties, then yes.
I like this, and I have 2 thoughts on this. The first is I like narrative as a way to avoid wireheading too, because it also avoids the other problem, right? So some people have like a goal of happiness, and happiness is the most trivial thing to wirehead, right? Because if you think you're happy, you are happy, right? If you think this is a good narrative, you may be being fooled. Right? Like it may actually be objectively a shitty narrative, and someone from outside can look and be like, yo, that's not actually a good story. Someone just hooked a wire up to your brain. And you'd be like, wait, that's a shitty story. You're telling me I've been sitting here with a wire on my brain? Whereas the happiness one, someone says, hey, you got a wire plugged into your brain. You're fake happiness. And they're like, what do you mean? The happiness is the intrinsic thing. And narrative also fights against these external things. Like some people in life want to have impact. And I'm like, well, you're going to lose to AIs, right? But narrative, internally experienced narrative, as also experienced by you in the past, gets around the wireheading problem, kind of. My second thought, which is maybe the cooler thought, is I think there is a somewhat decent chance that when I die, the next thing I'm going to see is a game over screen.
Right. Well, have you ever looked into like near-death experiences where people were like, clinically dead, but they had some conscious experience and they, came back and like, oh man, they describe it. Have you looked into that, and do you place any weight on those experiences?
I smoked DMT once, and I had I think a similar experience. I think that a lot of those experiences are so right before you die, your brain releases a ton of DMT. And I think that's kind of what the experience is. I'm careful to not say I think it's anything otherworldly. I think it's just that.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, if we're a materialist, then that's the explanation. But, the DMT release just could be correlated with something else, but not necessarily the ultimate cause of what's happening.
Maybe. I listened to your Robin Hansen episode, and I'm much more sympathetic to like his like brain in a vat arguments. Right? He's like, well, it could be a brain in a vat, but the DMT is still actually would cause that, right? It's not really anything otherworldly. I think that the DMT, even if I'm not a pure materialist, just Occam's razor.
Yeah, John Lennox. Do you know John Lennox?
Mm-mm.
He's a math professor at Oxford. He has an example, which I'm going to steal here. He's like, well, if I were to put on this pot of water onto a stove and heat it, and ask you like, okay, why is it now boiling? And you say, okay, well, you had all this heat and it kind of like conducted through the copper pan, and then it's going into the water, and then it increases the vapor pressure. When the vapor pressure exceeds that of the atmospheric pressure, well, then it boils. Well, I mean, that's one answer, but the other answer is because I wanted to boil this pot of water, right? And so it's kind of like similar here. Like we're just like have tunnel vision kind of just on the molecules, so then we don't really see kind of the broader picture. So, and it could be the case that it is just a release of DMT, or it could be that there are kind of, certain experiences when we're being unplugged from this portion of the simulation, and then the DMT happens.
This privileges humanity. And
It does.
like I said earlier, I'm reluctant to privilege humanity. I don't think that you necessarily need to privilege humanity to, maybe narrative is my most important value, but followed closely by truth. And I worry that humanity isn't actually privileged, and I wouldn't want to construct things around that if I don't have to. If I don't have to, then, what does it matter? I mean, that doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me if humanity is not privileged, right? Like, that doesn't change anything about how I feel about myself and how I feel about the universe having purpose, right? The universe is teeming with purpose, meaning, and beauty, and it doesn't necessarily have to privilege humanity to have those things.
It's true, it doesn't. But like we've explored a little bit, it seems like your intuitions kind of change depending on if that's true or not. So it seems like
yes,
one of the important things we kind of need for this world is for people to sit together and kind of ask these questions, right? It might actually be good for the future of humanity if we have a bunch of people who say like, okay, well, let's look at this issue of is humanity privileged or not, and just kind of make arguments and kind of see where that takes us.
Yeah. I'm not going to be so arrogant just to believe that, like, I'm sure it's not. I lean that way, but I would certainly be open to arguments that convince me otherwise. Particularly, I think there are ways perhaps to see outside the simulation. That, again, don't privilege humanity, but maybe if we do build quantum computers and we figure out how to do compute that's very, very expensive, and we, jack up the AWS bill of whoever's running the simulation, well, then maybe they'll pay us a visit.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And again, maybe like collective prayer could somehow solve this. Like, hey, everyone, 12 o'clock Eastern time, we'll pray and see if Amazon arranges the stars to say like, yeah, you owe us some money, so we want you to do X, Y, or Z. Yeah, it could happen. These are the experiments we need to be running.
I agree.
Yeah. So you've been very generous with your time. Know that it's getting late.
Sure.
So we'll just kind of like just a few more minutes. You'd mentioned that you're partly working on something called cheap ETH, or is that and then you said, well, we can get into speculation, and you had of a sound in your voice that led me to think that you have something interesting to say there.
My friend who I'm working on cheap ETH with wrote this poem. So cheap ETH basically is just like, I forked Ethereum. It's an Ethereum fork that the underlying asset, which you use to pay for the contract deployments, is cheap and not expensive. The only reason Ethereum is expensive is because of speculators. Right? And what speculators are, like, people are like, crypto is a beautiful world without middlemen. And in a traditional sense of middlemen, that might be true. But if you view speculators as middlemen, and I have a definition, my definition for speculators are people who buy an asset, not because they love it or not to use it, but just because they think somebody else will buy it for more later. So that's a speculator, and I don't think speculators provide any value, and you want to kick them out if you can. And my friend's poem about speculators goes like this. It's a short poem. It's, one day speculators will buy all the air, not to breathe, just to hold. Then everyone will suffocate, and finally speculators will be sad.
All the hodlers of air are thinking about how they can get rich right now.
Exactly. And then, the joke about the last line of the poem is, are the speculators sad because, they killed everybody, or are the speculators sad because they don't have anyone to dump the air on?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that, make us think like, maybe we're not perfectly aligned with that which will kind of lead to, I don't know, some sort of maxima of human flourishing.
Yeah. And I'm not an economist. I have not thought through the speculator case at all. They're just a type of person that I see pop up all the time in the crypto world, and I'm like, wait a second, you just take money out of the system. You add no value. Why do we want you here?
Right, yeah.
Because speculators drive the price up, and then I don't know about that.
Right.
So yeah, and then to bring up the other thing I'm working on, I work on Comma AI, and Comma AI's stated purpose is to solve self-driving cars, but I started it to change culture.
Okay, well, you have to follow up on that. Tell us about that.
Self-driving cars are going to be solved. Someone's going to solve them, right? I don't personally care about getting rich. I mean, I joke about it a lot. I'm like, what am I going to do? Buy a yacht? Right? Like I long ago made enough money to live as comfortable life as I want. I'm fairly minimalist. I don't really want anything more. So, why do it? And well, you can only do it if you can exert some kind of change on what the solution to self-driving cars looks like. And I don't want to live in a world where, we all have to ask Waymo very politely, you use hate speech on YouTube. I'm sorry, you don't get a ride. Oh, that's too bad. You're banned from Waymo. I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to live in a world where technology is centralized. I want to live in a world where technology is decentralized. And that's kind of the point of Comma.
Yeah, that's a great point, because, you think well, hey, if Amazon controls everything and they have Alexa everywhere, they can hear you, say something, or at least think you say something. You're like, oh, we're going to lock your refrigerator for 12 hours.
That's right.
Because
that's
of that.
Right.
Yeah. So this is great.
The solution to this, by the way, is not to fix Amazon. It's to make Amazon not have the power to lock your refrigerator in the first place. Decentralize the technology, and then none of these things become a problem, right? It's the same thing with the social media. Facebook and Twitter are always so concerned about whether they should block this or not block this, and I think it'd be much better if we just lived in a world where they didn't have that power.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point.
I think they might prefer that world too. Right? I don't think they necessarily want that power. Maybe Amazon doesn't even want that power. Do they really want to have to use all the Alexas to monitor hate speech and lock refrigerators? No, but if they don't do it, they'll get outraged,
Right. Well, and you kind of worked at some big tech companies. Do you have any insight into what their thinking is on anything along these lines?
Many years ago, the last time I was at a big tech company was Google at 2014, and I started to see the sharp decline. I started to see a group of people who were apolitical, and then a bunch of entryists showed up and basically hijacked the organization. So, weak power. They were weak. Larry and Sergey leave. Sundar Pichai is not going to, stand up for any positive affirmative values. So you get these people who play politics who rise up in the ranks, and then they control the company.
Yeah, it is interesting. Scott Alexander had a post a couple of years ago about, hey, what happened to all these atheist blogs? It's like, atheist blogs are very big 10 years ago. What happened to them? He's like, they're all SJW blogs now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, yeah, you just displaced the substrate, from the ultimate authority binding pocket, and then everything just starts to go wacky.
Yeah. You know what? I'm not opposed. Some people I meet are very opposed to SJW ideas, and I'm not. Most of the ideas sound pretty nice. I mean, don't take it too far. But what I'm opposed to is, why is DEF CON having a conversation about trans identity and hacking? It just doesn't seem related to me. Right? Does this have to be an all-consuming virus, or you guys have your conference and we'll have ours?
Right. It's the alignment problem in our lives, right? Just like
Yeah.
trying to optimize just one variable in every aspect of society, and that, like, yes, we can optimize to a certain extent with that, taking into other variables into consideration. But yeah, the totalizingness, then leads to an ideology. You have to believe that, X, Y, and Z is true when they're not, and then you're punished for people who are intellectually curious and care about the truth. Then yeah, it's not really a kind world for those of us.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I especially in the last like couple years, I've grown to just be like, okay, I mean, this is what the world is. We're gonna move through it. My thoughts on Google and Facebook is just that they're not technology companies, and we should stop referring to them as such and realize that they're media companies, and they behave just like every other media company, and then they make a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, you have gotten
Or
into
even
Buddhism,
public
I can tell.
utilities.
Maybe. I mean, I think you can talk about media as a public utility in the exact same way, right? And in general, I find NPR to be one of the better news sources. 'Cause, I mean, the bar isn't that high.
Yeah, that's true, and but it's also something to consider: what is covered versus what not is covered, and that's the huge issue. NPR tends to be very good about what they do cover, but
Yes,
certain things they don't cover. Yeah.
without a doubt. I'm not saying NPR is perfect. I'm just saying I
Right.
find
Right.
NPR much preferable to CNN or the Washington Post.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dixon, anything else? I mean, this has been great.
Yeah.
I could probably talk for hours, but I know it's almost 7 o'clock.
Yeah. I gotta.
It has been fantastic. We should do another episode with George if he's available. We're probably gonna be taking a small hiatus over the next couple of weeks at least. But we'd love to have you back on in the future.
Cool. Sounds good. I'm really glad you guys are doing this.